Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the British Royal Armouries with the final segment in our series about development of the Sten gun. Today we have the Sten Mk5. Now if you're coming here from the Sten Mk3 video and you're wondering what happened to the 4, well the answer is the Sten Mk4 never went into production. It was a series of experimental developments that never went into production. So there are elements of the Sten Mk4 that we do see here, with the trigger group being moved a bit. There were some suppressed versions of the Mk4. I actually have a video on a suppressed Sten Mk4. So if you're interested in that, I'll link to it in the description below, along with the prior videos in this series. But in terms of actual production issued firearms, the Sten Mk4 is a non-entity, and they went directly from the Mk3 to the Sten Mk5. Now, fundamentally, the Sten Mk5 is the really high-quality, nice version of the Sten gun. And it was developed in 1943, which is a little bit odd. In hindsight, we look at 1943 and we think the Allies are going to win at this point, the tide has turned, things are more basically secure. But at the time, that would not have been obvious or evident. The outcome of the war was still kind of in question in 1943 to those in 1943. And so the idea of going back and making a higher quality version of the Sten gun is not as obvious as we might think of it today. It's possible that they were looking at this as a gun that was going to be with the British military for years after the war, and they wanted to have a nicer version of it to keep on hand. There may have been some concern that the reports out there criticizing the Sten for being total garbage were perhaps somewhat true. Ultimately, the Sten had some issues, but it was a reliable and effective firearm, and it worked well enough. It worked well for the troops. Very crude gun, awkward to handle, but reliable and effective. But perhaps there was some concern that it wasn't reliable and effective enough. Now, by 1943 as well, demand for submachine guns in the British Army had mostly caught up to production, or production had caught up to demand. And so there wasn't quite as much urgency to crank the guns out by the millions as there had been the year before, 1942. At any rate, whatever the specific impetus, the Sten Mk5 is developed in 43. The plans are finalized in December, and the guns first are issued into the service in February of 1944. They will see their first combat use actually at D-Day. British glider-borne paratroops of the 6th Airborne Division had Sten Mk5s, and you can see pictures of them from some of the historical fighting in the Normandy landings. Now, from a practical perspective, you can kind of see most of the changes here. What they did to make the Sten better were give it a real pistol grip and a real stock, which are fantastically more comfortable to use than the tube stocks and the sheet metal welded stocks of the earlier variations. They went ahead and gave it essentially the nose of a No. 4 Mk I Enfield rifle, the front sight of the Enfield, and also the attachment for an Enfield bayonet. So this was really the first practical way to put a bayonet on a Sten gun. There was, not experimental, there was a version of a bayonet made for the Mk II Sten, but it saw very limited production and almost no service use. So the Mk5 gives us the bayonet. It also gives us a vertical front grip, but that was a very short-lived thing. So let's take a closer look. Let me show you a few of the other elements of the Mk5. Let's just start at the front of the Mk5 here and move our way backwards. We have a No. 4 Mk I Enfield bayonet. This is just a very simple, basically a screwdriver spike, and it locks on with these two lugs on the front of the barrel. So the bayonet itself just fits on like that, push in, rotate, locks in place, and then has this release button on the bottom. Along with that, of course, you get the No. 4 Enfield front sight assembly, the protective wings, and the front sight itself, which is adjustable for windage. The first time ever you have actual adjustable sights on a Sten gun. The next feature we come to is the vertical front grip, and this is a little bit of a controversial one. The very first drawings of the Sten Mk5 actually do not include this grip. And in fact, none of the official drawings of the Mk5 include this grip. We know they were produced. You see them in pictures from combat use, and These grips were in military inventory, but they were in inventory and they were used for really a pretty short time because they caused a couple of problems. So first off, the grip is attached to the barrel shroud here, which, as you may recall, doubles as the barrel locking nut. And when you're shooting a Mark II holding onto this grip, you're not really putting any torque on that barrel nut. But with this vertical grip, you can be, and you can cause problems like that, where you can pop the ratchet loose. This can cause wear on the ratchet teeth that lock the barrel in place. And it's entirely theoretically possible to drop onto the ground wrong on this, have it pop loose, spin half a revolution, your barrel comes loose. That's a really bad problem to have, especially in combat. In addition to that, you can see there's a screw inside there, and that locks the wooden part of the hand grip onto this wrap that attaches it to the barrel nut. The grips under firing, extended firing, would come loose. And if you tried to tighten them up, you could tighten them a little bit, but then you would end up cracking the grip and breaking it. So ultimately, you had a front grip that was convenient, but also often either broken or loose or causing problems to your barrel. And for all of those reasons combined, these things got scrapped, actually really quite quickly. You'll notice we have Sten Mk5 markings on the magazine well. Now mechanically, this is basically a modified Sten Mark II, so the barrel nut is the same system as the Mark II. The ratchet here, the spring-loaded catch, the folding magazine well, that's all the same. We have the push-through safety. There we go. We mentioned this on the Mark II. This was a development that was figured out and in place by the time the Mark V was being produced. So all the Mark Vs will have that push-through bolt safety that prevents the bolt from bouncing open and firing unintentionally if the back end of the gun gets jarred. Rear sight's the same. The bolt, the spring, all the internals are the same as the earlier patterns of Sten. Now, what they have done to the fire control group is essentially, the fire control group is unmodified, but it's been shifted forward. So if we compare this to a regular Sten Mark II, it's a little hard to see because of the camera perspective here, but if I line up the triggers, everything else lines up in place. Well, not the screw, because this is just a friction attachment. But what they essentially did was take the fire control group here and shift it forward so that you have space to put this pistol grip right here at the back of the receiver. In practical production terms, that means that your fire control group cover here is going to have to be a different component because it has to be shorter. So you can see they both pretty much go out to the magazine well, but that's a shorter distance because of the space of the pistol grip here. The buttstock is the same style of attachment. So we have a hook on the bottom of what is essentially a Lee Enfield buttstock, brass butt plate even, butt trap, sling swivel on the top of the buttstock. The Royal Small Arms factory at Enfield made an experimental batch of 500 of these Mark V Stens, but aside from that, all of the production was done at the other Royal Ordnance factories, Fazakerley and Thiel. None of the commercial contractors made these, and they weren't made overseas by the Australians or the Canadians or anybody else. Total production was 527,428 Mark V Sten guns. They were, by far, the best fit and finished, most comfortable to use, most practical and effective of the whole Sten gun family. There was also a silenced version of the Sten 5 that was produced and used. Ultimately, in field service, the Sten Mark V was the official standard submachine gun for the British military until 1957, when the Sterling was adopted as the L2, L2A3, I believe. But the Stens actually remained in service side by side with Sterlings until at least the late 1960s. It's not clear to me exactly when they were fully phased out, but they were good, reliable guns, and you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's not as desirable as a Sterling, but if it's what you have, it's a perfectly effective gun and substantially nicer than any of the other Sten variants. So it is a fitting conclusion to the Sten gun story. I do anticipate having future videos on some of the oddball versions of the Sten, but I thought it would be good to finish off a series on the basic patterns so that you have something to compare back to when we do go ahead and look at some of the oddballs and the foreign production Stens. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and the whole series. If you haven't seen the previous videos on the Marks 1, 2, and 3, I'll link to them down in the description text. You should definitely go and check those out. A big thanks to the British Royal Armouries for giving me access to these guns to film for you. Thanks for watching.